Welcome to Green and Gold FC. I am joined for a Socceroos recap with freelance journalist Mike Tuckerman. How are you going, Mike?
Yeah, very well. Thanks. Thanks very much for having me on.
Fantastic. So we complained about the Sunny 11 in the first game. We thought that the front three lacked speed and dynamism. That seems to be fixed in the second game. What are your thoughts on the Sunny 11?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think Popper was probably always going to make changes for tonight. You probably want to freshen the side up a little bit. They got off to a slow start in Canberra, and I think you could argue they got off to a slow start tonight in Auckland as well. But look, I think there's really no cause for complaints for the Socceroos. I think probably answered a few questions tonight. There were a couple of players who really put their hand up. We'll talk about Mohamed Toure, no doubt, at length. But I think there are a couple of others as well, starting with Paul Izzo. So I think he was fantastic across the two games. Looked very accomplished once again tonight. Pulled off a couple of decent saves. Was a little bit unlucky with Chris Wood's goal. So I think, in terms of was it a successful enterprise? Well, we retained the soccer ashes, but more importantly, a couple of perhaps sort of fringe squad members gave Tony Popovic something to think about.
So we'll get into the positives because there are a lot of them, but let's get the rants out of the way. No Segasic, playing risky business with another dual international who's in excellent form for Portsmouth and was a Golden Boot winner last year. There seems to be a pattern with Popper. What do you read into this? Do we have reason to be nervous? Do we think we're going to lose another?
Look, there definitely is a pattern, but I don't necessarily think it's something that Socceroos fans should necessarily be worried about. So I think we saw it with Nestor Irankunda, Max Ballard as well, who was another player who came in and did really well. Nicholas Milanovic as well. So I think what we've seen with Tony Popovic as Socceroos coach is that he puts a very high premium on a Socceroos jersey. And I think that premium is something that had potentially not gone missing, but wasn't necessarily a hallmark of previous administrations. And it's probably worth considering Tony Popovic's career in context as well. So he was a Socceroo who sort of won 50-odd caps for Australia and always sort of represented his country as a player, with a real sort of wholeheartedness. You could sense the pride that Tony Popovic had in playing for Australia. And I think that's something that he's asking of and expecting from his players. And I think in terms of, are we going to lose another international? Well, of course, we've lost, Nectar Triantis to Greece. And there were some comments made, in the media that Triantis wasn't happy about coming down for Socceroos camps and not getting on the pitch. And I think, I actually think that's part of the test from Tony Popovic. And he sort of said it, basically, if you don't want to be here and you don't want to be a squad member and you don't want to sort of take part, and bearing in mind that we'll go to a World Cup with 26 players, if you can't be a valued squad member, then Tony doesn't necessarily want you here. So I think with Adrian Segicic, the other element to that we need to consider is that as Australian football fans, we have a tendency to get really excited about players. We saw that with Irankunda, who's a match-winning type of a player. And Segicic has obviously made a terrific start in English football at Portsmouth, and he's also proved himself not only as a goal-scoring threat, but a creative type of a player. And I think that's the sort of player that we've been missing for the Socceroos. So I can understand why fans are really clamouring to see Segicic in an Australia jersey. And I think everybody has a tendency to sort of say, well, he's had two good games for Portsmouth, so therefore he should be an automatic starter for the Socceroos. But I think the difference kind of lays, or where Tony Popovic is willing to meet is in the middle. And say Adrian now has been brought into camp. He's been told that he's wanted. He hasn't got on the pitch. It was a friendly anyway, so you're not necessarily cap tied there. So I think it's a case of just bringing these players into camp, seeing what they can do, because that's probably the other unspoken element. You have to prove yourself in training. So I don't think we're in danger of losing Segacic. I think maybe we might have had a slightly different conversation tonight had the Socceroos not won convincingly, but I think probably the performance tonight, and particularly some terrific performances from a few key individuals, probably put that debate to rest for the time being. But I have no doubt that we'll see Adrian Segacic involved in the near future.
Yeah, a lot of these players, unless Popper's worked with them previously, we saw with Max Ballard, it's basically his third camp and he's finally got his first start. So you have other dual internationals of interest. You have Robertson and Volpato. Volpato's been starting to like Socceroos content on Instagram and following them and engaging with them. So if either of these two players are interested in committing, they need to do it quickly because it does seem to take about 3 camps before Popper starts to give them a go. So hopefully Segacic isn't lost. He knows it's part of the process and there is joy on the other side of that process if he's committed enough. Let's talk about that start. It seems to be with every single Socceroos game I've seen, both under Graham Arnold and under Popovic, the first 10 minutes is nervy. I saw Metcalf had a bad touch early. Janek with a silly giveaway near the box. Ballard with a silly giveaway led to a shot. O'Neill nearly gave away an own goal. I could probably go through all the players, but it just looks like we start every game really, really nervous. Is there a mentality issue here? Popovic talked about players being scared to make mistakes. What do you think's happening here?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, particularly when, Popovich himself sort of came out and said we want to start on the front foot. Um, Look, I think sometimes you've got to give credit to the opponents. And I think New Zealand are probably a team that Australian football fans are probably liable to kind of dismiss as a quality side. But we saw some of the stats about, I think something like 19 of the Socceroos squad for the 2 fixtures came through the A League. Well, if that's the case, then so did plenty of the All Whites as well, are obviously A League representatives. So they're a decent side. I think you can. It probably depends on whether you watch. You view the performances as a glass half full type scenario or a glass half empty, because on the one side, yes, we've started slowly. Yes, we relied, particularly in the game in Canberra, on Paul Izzo to keep the score at 0-0. But the reality is, we didn't concede a goal. Eventually, the defense sort of bedded in. It's more a question of now, with the World Cup finals being 9 months away, how do we not only iron out some of those defensive mistakes, as you've sort of alluded to, but also start matches kind of on the front foot and not have to wait until sort of 30 minutes in to press up the pitch or put a goalkeeper under pressure. I think that's what friendlies are for. At the end of the day, as much as we all love to say we beat New Zealand at something again, it's an experimental type of a squad. And it's a camp where you look at some names that maybe you hadn't looked at before. Paul Izzo obviously being a big one. Max Ballard again. Ballard's somebody who scored the winner in Canberra and was kind of rewarded for it. And I think we learned plenty from the 2 Soccer Ashes games. And I don't know that we should be necessarily too concerned about the starts now, but of course, when push comes to shoves, then you do need to be concerned about slow starts when you're playing in the heat of a North American World Cup finals.
Yeah, I remember under Arnie, we used to deal with those early game nerves by just getting to the ball to Moy as often as we could in the first 10 minutes. And then when Moy retired, it seemed that Arnie used to have this first 10 minutes where he just knock the ball in the air for 10 minutes and just try and get a bunch of aerial draws, get that nervous energy out. I wonder if we need a strategy just to deal with those early nerves, or is this a sort of thing where you need to just deal with the player psychiatry in camp?
Look, again, another interesting question. I think it's more about an overall positivity, and I think, and by that I mean in terms of the way they set up on the pitch and the way they start the game. And I think in terms of positivity, that's where Socceroos fans can be quite impressed with Mohamed Touré's performance. And I say that because he didn't necessarily have the best of starts tonight in Auckland. There was that one chance early on where he strayed offside and kind of blew the opportunity for the Socceroos. And I sort of thought, I hope it's not going to be one of those games where, in fairness to somebody like Cassini Yangi, we'd seen him kind of be a peripheral figure at times, leading the line for the Socceroos. But I thought Mohamed Toure really came into his own. He was another one who really impressed, and that's aside from the fact that he was very unlucky not to register a hat trick tonight. That third goal, Lewis Miller was marginally offside, but he took his chances so well. But it wasn't just that he took his chance well. If you watch Nesta Irankunda's goal, it's Toure who pulled two defenders away from Nesteri by just sort of with a decent kind of run into the box. And I thought the combination of Toure and Irankunda really posed some questions for the All Whites defence tonight. And I think it also opened up a little bit of space for somebody like Connor Metcalf, who obviously played the first ball for Toure's opening goal. And I just think that positivity in terms of some of the athleticism that Toure and Irankunda offer just allowed probably Aidan O'Neill to control the game a little bit better in midfield than what they had done in Canberra. And so I think overall, it was a really a great hit out for Tony Popovic and for Socceroos fans to kind of see the possibilities. Yes, the Socceroos are far from the finished product. Yes, there are still questions over some key positions. Yes, there at times you wonder if certain players are going to play themselves into form in a green and gold jersey. But on the whole, I think it was a really impressive performance overall. And I think it started with just being a little bit more positive. And I think that's what we'll see now that we don't have the pressure of World Cup qualification kind of to deal with. I think you'll see hopefully better and better performances as we go along.
So we talked about the speed of Irankunda and Toure providing. It felt a lot easier to work through the press. How much was that O'Neill and Ballard offering more on the ball and combining better? And how much was that just that speed, just providing that little bit extra space?
Yeah, look, I think Irankunda in particular, he really troubles defenses with his physicality and not just that, but with his willingness to be direct. I think what he does is he makes defenders second guess, and he often makes defenders back off. And so that creates a little bit of space between the lines. And I think, I think at times, Aidan O'Neill and Ballard look like very similar players. And I do wonder if almost that double six type scenario, if it's, more of a hindrance at times than something that opens up the game. But I think that's something that you only kind of, it's a question that is only solved by actually playing. And I do think there was a willingness with Mohamed Toure leading the line tonight to press higher up the park. And I think, the natural result of that was the sort of ball that Metcalf played in for Toure to open the scoring, which was just it was quite a direct ball. And again, it was the goal itself was half made by Toure's physicality, his willingness to get in front of the defender, to use his body to shield the ball, which he did really well. And then he took his chance really well. And sometimes too, that confidence can come from, converting a chance, having one chance and scoring it. And I thought that Mohamed then really kind of grew into the game, and I was really impressed with his overall performance after what was admittedly a bit of a slow start in the probably first 20 or 30 minutes. But yeah, I mean, I think in general, Socceroos fans would like to see the national team play with a little bit more positivity broadly, like in general. But it's probably worth remembering too, Tony Popovic, the former centre back, we saw it with Alessandro Ciccardi being named captain tonight. I'm a former centre back myself, so Pop, I love it. Centre back brigade all the way. But I think defensive stability is something that we haven't always had as a national team either, and I think that's potentially where we build. We saw that at the World Cup under Graham Arnold in Qatar. If you can, hold teams to a stalemate, it only takes one goal. Really, to win a World Cup game. And I think defensive stability is something that, again, that's the Socceroos have really worked on. And I think there's plenty of reasons then, therefore, to be quite quite sort of impressed by the overall display against the Kiwis.
Two of our best defenders in Harry Sutar and Jackson Irvine still to come back in. I want to highlight a player that I didn't expect to be highlighting for positive reasons. That's Kai Rolls. I rate him as a left centre back who's played at wing back. I made the comment at the last podcast that the formation felt like a mullet where you have Party at the back but Payne at the front. This felt like a frollet where the Payne is now at the back. I was happy with the front three. I love Metcalf as a real compliment to Irankunda and Toure. He surprised me. So first of all, he hit, I think, 5 out of 9 accurate long passes, which was really, really valuable for Irankunda, and really, really read the play well against pacey wingers. He doesn't have the same pace as the winger he's marking, but just his anticipation to get in front of a player and intercept or just diffuse a situation. I was shocked that he could play at wing back. I thought he did well. Am I crazy? He is clearly not my first choice for wing back, but what do you think?
Look, I mean, I think it probably highlights the versatility of certain players, and Kai's definitely one of them. I mean, there's probably a few other things at play there as well. So one of which, he'd essentially lost his spot in the starting side under Tony Popovich, so he probably had a point to prove. He's not having the best of seasons, or not Kai personally, but his club DC United in Major League Soccer is having an absolutely woeful season. They've been extremely ordinary for much of the Major League Soccer campaign, and so I think probably coming back into the nationals team setup has been a bit of a relief for Kai as well. But we've seen that I thought he played quite well tonight. He should have scored. Probably should have opened the score even the soccer. He's very unlucky not to. Terrific save from Max Troken. But look, he's a versatile player. He's experienced as well, and so I'm not overly surprised. But I think we sort of saw that versatility with Jordan Boss as well tonight. He's someone who can kind of slot in really on either kind of side of the pitch, and I think that's something that we need. We need a little bit of. Milos Degenek is another one who kind of does a job, and I know that Milos will be disappointed with the goal that Chris Wood scored tonight, but I think we've seen that tendency in world football under coaches like Pep Guardiola to coach the systems, and to sort of when one player sort of steps out to hope that somebody else can slot in. And I think Kai did himself like plenty of favors tonight in just proving that he can sort of be trusted to play kind of different sort of roles. But you touched on it earlier when Harry Sutar is back. I think, that central defensive position at the moment now for the Socceroos is absolutely stacked, given that Cam Burgess has sort of made one of those roles a bit of a lock. So it'll be interesting to see how the squad numbers get sort of whittled down, and that's a really good problem for Tony Popovich to have. I think for the first time probably in a little while, we've really got more than 26 players knocking on the door, and that competition should drive the standards. And I think in general, Lewis Miller is another one who sometimes cops knocks a little bit because he's maybe not, he's a very enthusiastic player, sometimes to his detriment, but he's somebody who when he comes on, he can kind of create a bit of panic in defence with his ability or willingness to sort of drive directly at defenders. And I think, that versatility that we sort of saw a little bit on show tonight was, again, something that the Socceroos setup has no doubt encouraged.
I want to highlight Sakati tonight. Obviously, congratulations for his cap. But I want to highlight how it's used. So after last recording, I rewatched the replay of our first game, and I saw us use Sakati to change from a 3-4-2-1 formation into a traditional 4-3-3. Sometimes Sakati would go at high around the halfway line out wide as a right back. Sometimes he'd go join the midfield three, and you have one of our other players join the wing, possibly Silvera. So I've often said that Popovich has quite a complex system for international football, almost as complicated as club football. I think I'm going to have to drop that word almost, because it seems this is a new layer of complexity. Presumably get the most out of Sakati. Can you play this complex at club football? Are the players just going to confuse themselves?
I mean, look, I think Alessandro's kind of playing in one of the most technical leagues in the world anyway, and not just technical, but highly tactical as well. So if any player is going to be able to slot into different systems, it's him. He also has a really high football IQ. And look, I think he's been earmarked as the Socceroos captain of the future, so I wasn't surprised at all to see him handed the armband tonight. But in terms of the broader question of can we set up in different systems? Well, the reality is, again, at World Cup level, you have to, and we've seen playing teams, particularly higher standard teams in Asia like Japan, that if you're not able to implement new systems in real time on the pitch and alter the way that you're playing, you don't really necessarily stand a chance at the higher levels of the game. So I think it's a good thing. I think the friendlies as well. I don't think it can be overstated how much the Socceroos have kind of missed the opportunity to experiment, to test new systems, and to potentially lose with no consequences in previous World Cup campaigns because we've left qualification so late. In the last World Cup, obviously to the absolute last second. And so when you're playing live fixtures, you don't have the luxury of trying out new systems. And so I think again, that's something that it's all, much has been made of Tony Popovich now going 10 games unbeaten as Socceroos coach. But I think the reality is in amongst that it's not good enough for the Socceroos to simply qualify for a World Cup. I think there's probably a happy medium with us saying that we're going to go out and win it because I don't necessarily think that that's an overly realistic hope at the moment. But I do think that we need to go to World Cup finals with the mindset that we can do some damage. And I mean, it's a little bit ironic that, one of our more maligned coaches in Graham Arnold actually proved that we can do some damage. So, I think all of this kind of testing and trying new systems, that's what you want to do in friendly series like what we've just watched. And I think Tony Popovich is a man of his convictions, whether we agree with them or not, and he's going to try out these systems. And what better time to do it, really?
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to watch the replay. I noticed live that Sakade almost running towards the box in open play and getting involved in some passing sequences. So I'm assuming we try something very similar, and I understand the theory of Sakade is your best player. You want him to be touching the ball a lot. So it makes sense. I do worry about such a complex system this close to the World Cup, but obviously, good luck to him. And I suppose the trade-off of that is actually, before I get to the next question, that's probably why it takes, if you're a young player, maybe 3 camps before you get a run, because there is quite a lot of complexity to what Tony Popovich is trying. Let's talk about the man of the hour, Mo Toure. I've been an advocate for him for so long. I believe his start to his career has surpassed Scott McDonald. He's probably the 3rd best start to a career of any Socceroo in history after Eloise and Viduka. And I am just so thrilled to see what a difference he makes in terms of just being able to win duels. He doesn't look like he's going to win, to be able to get shots off, to create threats, to create runs. How do you evaluate him as a player? And what do you think his ceiling is?
Well, I don't think he's reached his ceiling by any stretch. I think he's just on the start of his national team journey. Look, I think I think he's benefited from playing regular football in Europe. Um, he brings a physicality which is similar to Iran Kundar, and you talk about watching somebody like Alessandro Ciccardi sort of dipping into midfield or being part of like pressing higher up the park. If you watch Iran Kundar and Mohamed Toure against the All Whites in Auckland, they often interchanged as well. And I think that's sort of in terms of who was sort of playing a traditional number 9 role. And I think Mohamed is somebody who'll benefit immensely from the hit out tonight. It's a shame that he didn't register that hat trick just because it's not a common feat for Socceroo strikers. But in saying that, he's a very level headed kid. he probably knows he's not necessarily the finished product. We've been crying out for a world class striker ever since Mark Viduka, and um, look, I think he's given himself every chance now of ensuring he's got a spot on the plane. But that in saying that, there's still I think 4 international windows to come. So one good game against New Zealand doesn't necessarily mean that you're starting in Mexico City or wherever the Socceroos end up. So it's about building on those performances, and I actually think he's probably a good example of someone who I suspect has probably benefited from not being thrown in at the deep end every single time he's being called up to a Socceroos squad. Because we do have a bit of a messiah complex in Australia, in as much as, and we see that with Nesri and Irukunda. There's a desire for somebody to come in and prove themselves the next Leo Messi, and I don't know that how realistic that is for Australian football. And I'm someone who I don't mind seeing players kind of build into their national team profile, and I think that's kind of what Tony Popovich is aiming for. At least that's the way I interpret it. And I think Mohamed Touré's performance tonight was vindication of that. You don't necessarily need to come in and score a hat trick in your first 5 minutes in a green and gold jersey. It's about building up to these types of performances. It's about building the kind of combinations that we saw tonight with Irukunda and with Connor Metcalf and with some of the second half substitutes as well. So if you want to talk about his individual performance, he showed a lot of physicality to score his first goal. But his second goal was probably even more impressive, and his ability to take defenders away from the danger zone to bring them with him. It opened up a lot of space. He finished exceedingly well. He was in the right place to finish off what looked like his hat trick goal, and so I was really impressed with his performance. But I think most importantly, I know now that he will have built the trust for somebody like Tony Popovich to know that he can bring him into the next squad and continue to do a job.
So, the last player I want to highlight is Connor Metcalf. He's one of those players who's blessed with all the qualities that coaches love, but not necessarily blessed with all the qualities that fans notice straight away. But he is playing at a high level. He had 2 assists, and a lot of his activity was central today. He nearly had a secondary assist, if not for the offside. So I'll be interested to see the replay if there's a change of system too, to take him from that wide player into that central role. What do you make of him as a player?
Well, I mean, he's somebody that I probably watch more than the average Aussie fan because I watch a lot of Bundesliga football, and he's somebody who has been plagued by injury, to be honest. And he's only just back. He's really only just recently returned. To sort of it being every day in the match day squad at St. Pauli. To your point, he's probably a player a bit like a Brett Holman or more latterly Robbie Cruz. He's got all the tools. He's certainly a player who's blessed with vision. He's technically a good player, but I do think I can sometimes understand why Socceroos fans are a little bit impatient at times because he's another player who at times can drift in and out of games, or perhaps more to the point, can sometimes make the wrong pass or make the wrong decision or find himself caught out of position. And I think fans can find that quite frustrating. But again, tonight, I think he was probably a good case in point that if you give players an opportunity and you trust them and you know that they've already come from technically quite a high level and quite a high league, like Connor has done, I think he'd probably show what he can do. But in saying that, I think it's okay and fair to expect a certain standard from the Socceroos, and I think Connor sort of is on his way, but we just need to see more of it, and we need to see more of what he showed tonight. Where if you get your head up and you have a little bit of vision, a little bit of faith that your number 9 is going to finish off an opportunity, we'll play them in. And we saw that tonight. So again, look, plenty of green shoots, plenty to be happy with, but probably far from the finished product realistically.
Yeah, I imagine some improvement will be needed before the next window, which will have much more difficult opposition in USA and Canada. Well, maybe not more difficult, but at least higher ranked. Maybe New Zealand is not done any favors by the ranking at the moment. Thanks so much for joining us, Mike Tuckerman. That's all we have time for in this week's edition, Socceroos edition. It's been fantastic to win the Soccer Ashes and relive this rivalry. If you think we've just don't know what we're talking about and want to tell us what it is, please join us on the forum and make sure you get your opinions across. Or you love what we say finally someone's told the truth. Same thing again. Please remember to hit like and subscribe. We're on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple, and of course, Twitter. So the forum is greenandgoldfc.com. But that's all we have time for this week. Until next time, is bye for now.